So before you look at the paper, it's a heads up. This Sunday, everybody knows is Pesach Sheni. Let's refresh our memory. What's Pesach Sheni? The second Pesach. So this is the first anniversary of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's the first Pesach in the desert, which is actually the only one they observed in the desert. So, as you know, integral and the highlight in many ways of the observance of Pesach is to eat the Korban Pesach at the Seder night. In order to offer the Korban Pesach, one has to be ritually pure, Toher. What happened was, a group of people, they come to Moishe Rabbeinu. As it turns out, this was the last day of the purification process. They were impure. There's several opinions, but one opinion is that they were carrying the remains of Yosef. Now, how does a person become pure again after being in contact with a cadaver, a corpse, or a coffin that is carrying a corpse? So it's a 7-day process of being and then being sprinkled with the ashes of the paraduma, the red heifer on the 3rd and 7th day, and then the 8th day, the person immerses in mikveh again and is pure. This was the last day. They had 1 day to go. 1 day to go. And they come to Moishe Rabbeinu, we know the story, and they say, Lo Menigor, it's not fair. Why should we be withheld from participating in the Korban Pesach? If we can't eat of it, at least let's participate in the shechita of it, and someone else will shecht it outside the Mishkan. As Rashi explains all the detail of their argument, they were big time with the Chachamim. Without going into the detail of the argument, the end was, Moishe Rabbeinu says that no, this has to be, because they were arguing that just like the original Korban Pesach didn't conform with the future rules in the Mishkan Beis HaMikdash, this second year also not. And Moishe Rabbeinu is telling him, no, it does. It conforms completely, and therefore, sorry. But they insist. So he says, okay, I'll ask the Eibishter. And he asks the Almighty, and the Almighty says, they're right, good. And Hashem institutes a second Pesach. And that is exactly a month later, which is this Sunday, that someone who was Tomei, or was far away, or even intentionally didn't bring the Korban Pesach the first time, far away from Jerusalem, it has to be brought in the Beis HaMikdash, has a second opportunity on Pesach Sheni. However, on Pesach Sheni, A, it's not a 7-day Yom Tov, it's 1 day. B, it's not even a Yom Tov altogether, work is permitted. C, he may own chametz, though the actual Korban Pesach should be eaten with matzah and mortar, but he may own chametz. And that's Pesach Sheni. Now we're going to look at the Gemara from the Gemara in Pesachim, 3 opinions as to the actual definition, the halachic definition of Pesach Sheni and the ramifications of that. The first ramification is this. The first question is this. What happens if a person converts between the first Pesach and the second Pesach? Does a person bring the second korban or not? Or a young man becomes bar mitzvah. He wasn't bar mitzvah round 1, was bar mitzvah in between. Is he obligated to bring the first Pesach, the second Pesach or not? So there are 3 opinions. We're going to look at them. First of all, it's a little bit, you can see it's somewhat complicated, but not really. Let's look at the right-hand column, just identify the authors and what they say, and then the detail. So right-hand column going down is the opinion of Rabbi. Rabbi is Rabbi Yehuda Hanosi, right? The redactor of the Mishnah. He's called Rabbi. He was the leader. So he says that Pesach Sheni is regel b'fnei atzm. It's a separate Yom Tov. It doesn't mean Yom Tov in the strict sense you can't do work, but it means it's a separate Yom Tov. We'll soon see what that means. Rabbi Nosson says it's not a separate Yom Tov. Tashlumin the Rishon. It completes or compensates the first. Rabbi Chananya ben Akavia says takant the Rishon. It amends, integral to the first. What is the difference? Let's now see. Now we're going to go through all the scenarios and see where they argue. The legend on the page in front of you, as you can see, Shin, look at the bottom of the page. Shin stands for shoygeg, which means a person did not bring the korban inadvertently, through circumstances beyond his control. Someone died, he was impure, or even he lived far away, couldn't get there in time. Mem means Mazid. He lived in proximity, he lives in Yerushalayim. He could go there. If he doesn't live there, he was there for Yom Tov. He was there at Pesach. And he could go there and deliberately just didn't. That's amazing. One more important thing, the whole discussion here is, I forgot the most important part of the whole puzzle here. The Torah says, end of the day, it's very clear. If you don't bring the korban, a person incurs koris. Koris means cut off from his people. What exactly it means, there are different opinions, premature death, dying without children, dying before the age of 60. That too, but it's primarily a spiritual thing, spiritually cut off. The whole discussion here is, when does a person incur koris? Under what circumstances? Let's go through all of the scenarios. So let's begin with Rabbi. Top of the page. Shin. Both counts. What happens in a case where first Pesach, he was prevented, inadvertent? Let's use the Hebrew terms. Shoigig, can we use that? Just remember, shoigig means inadvertent. And the second Pesach, he was shoigig. He wanted to on both occasions, he was prevented. Is he liable? No. That's clear. And you can just glance down the other two opinions, all agree there. Furthermore, let's just go ahead. The final scenario, mazid, there too all agree. If you deliberately didn't bring it the first time, the second time, you incur the consequence. So there's no argument in the first or second case. The difference are the two middle scenarios. So let's see. First one. What happened to the first case? A person incurred mazid. He was mazid. Deliberately didn't do it. Now came the second one, and the second one, he was a shoigig. He wanted to but couldn't. Says Rabbi. Bottom line, Rabbi's opinion is, if you're amazed anywhere, either the first or the second, because it's a separate yontif, you incur. So you incurred it the first time. That's it. You've incurred. Now, if you went and brought it actually on Pesach Sheni, okay, then you could remove the death penalty that you incurred. But you didn't, even though you didn't because of circumstances beyond your control. Sorry, you incurred it the first time, it remains. Second scenario, the first time you were shoigig, you didn't incur the death penalty because you were shoigig. But the second time, mezid, you were. That the second time also has the ability to confer such a strict result, because it says a yom tov in its own right. And of course, the third scenario, mazid, for sure you're liable. So that's the strictest view. What about the question of an adult or a convert? Obligated or not? The Rabbi says yes, since it's a separate yom tov, so much so that failure to observe it in its own right can incur the drastic consequences. Right? You were shoigig the first time, but made it the second time, you're still liable. It's just because it's a separate yom tov. Therefore, if a person converted in between or became an adult, it's separate yom tov. You're liable. You're obligated to bring the korban. That's the opinion of who? Of Rabbi. We're clear? We're following the sheet here. Yeah. Rabbi Nosson says it compensates. It compensates, which means to say as follows. Let's go to the scenarios. Of course, if you're shoigig, in both cases, it's not liable. The second case, he agrees with Rabbi. It's the third case he disagrees. What's the second case? The second case was he was what? He was liable the first time. Now the second one compensates, but you didn't compensate. It doesn't matter. You were a shoigig that you were inadvertently you wanted to compensate, but you couldn't. So the liability remains that incurred from the first Pesach. What does he argue with Rabbi? If the first time you were a shoigig, first Pesach you wanted to, but you were prevented. Did you incur it then? You didn't. The fact that you were amazed the second time doesn't make you liable, like Rabbi says, because it's not an independent yom tov that has the power to confer liability. It's only there to compensate. So, in your case, no liability, and it didn't end up bringing it, but since the first time around you weren't deliberate, you did not incur liability. And of course, if you're deliberate in both cases, because primarily the first case, you are obligated. You are liable. What about a convert? Not obligated, because the second Yom Tov is not independent. It cannot confer liability. It's not independent. And therefore, if you're not obligated the first time and you became a convert in the middle, or you grew up in the middle, you're not obligated now. It doesn't talk to you. Pesach Sheni doesn't address you. There's no commandment to you. Then finally, we have Rabbi Chanina ben Akavi. He says that the second Pesach is integral to the first. It's not two, it's one. He's saying you do not incur liability the first time. You've got to see what happens later. There's no liability the first time. It's not like later we're going to remove it, erase it, compensate. We have to see the whole scenario. It's almost like you got a choice. Can you bring it the first time or the second time? It's one thing. It's the opposite of Rabbi. You see, Rabbi completely separate Yom Tov, and for Rabbi Hananya ben Akavia, it's one Yom Tov. Therefore, he says, as you can see, the only time you incur liability is if you're deliberate on both sides. So going on both occasions. So going through the scenarios. The first one, obviously, if you're inadvertent, you're not liable. The first time you were deliberate, mazid. Says Rabbi Hananya, you're not being now crossed off that you're liable yet. We got to see what happens. It's integral. It's fixed into. It's built into. The second Pesach is built into the first. We're going to see what happens. The second one, you're a shoygeg. You're prevented. You're not liable. Everybody else says you are liable here. He says not. Why? Because the second is integral. In other words, you cannot incur liability unless both of them you are deliberate. That's the only scenario. Likewise, the second case, the third case. The third case, you were inadvertent the first time. For sure, it didn't occur liability. The second time, you were deliberate. It's not a separate Yom Tov. It can't confer liability. It's there to fix the first. That's all it's there for. So you're not liable. The only time a person is liable is it's the extreme, or the most lenient in that sense. That the only time a person is liable is if he was deliberate on both occasions. As if it's like one big Yom Tov, and you've got to be deliberate on both aspects of it, A and B. We're clear? Okay. What's the final halacha? So the Rambam rules like Rabbi, that it's a Yom Tov unto itself, and therefore a convert or a boy that becomes an adult in between is obligated to bring the Pesach Sheni. Good. That's the final halacha. Let's go a little bit deeper. Here's the question of the day. There's always a question of the day. The Rambam, at the end of the day, even though it's a regel b'fnei atzmai, it's a separate Yom Tov. But if a person does the right thing, the ideal situation, you bring your korban on the first Pesach. You bring your korban on Pesach Sheni? No. It's only for the one who didn't. So the question therefore is as follows. We all know there are 613 mitzvahs. We have this as a tradition passed down by Moishe Rabbeinu. Now, if you can actually count how many times it says in the Torah, do or don't do, it's thousands. Thousands. So we're going to get to 613. So there's the Rambam and the PESACH and others. The general principle is that you only count the main mitzvah, and all the details related to that mitzvah are not a separate commandment in their own right. So that's how you arrive at number 613. So I'm asking you, Pesach Sheni is only if you didn't do the first Pesach. You wouldn't expect it to be a separate mitzvah on the list of 613, yet the Rambam does. It's only there if you didn't, even according to Rabbi. Ideally, Pesach Sheni is not for you, so the one who didn't bring the korban. Why does he count it as a separate mitzvah in the list of the 613 mitzvahs? That's one question. Now another question, which will be answered with the same answer. Going back to the original story, and I mentioned this deliberately, when these people came to Moishe Rabbeinu, Lo Manigara, so it was the last day of the purification process. They were already in the process of going through the Tahara. They'd already separated. Yosef was already, the coffin was already placed. They'd already encamped to be earlier. And it's the last day of the purification process, one day shy. So there's going to be a second chance. When should be the second chance? On Pesach. So you bring your korban on Pesach. While we're still celebrating Pesach, that's what Hashem should have come back with. Okay, first of all, you have to appreciate it. The third question coming in a second. But if they're going to get an answer a month later, you have to understand also that this is not something coming out of the blue. Every Yom Tov, a person's obligated to bring, the time when the Mishkan stood, holiday, it's called Eilis Chagiga, festive offerings, and Eilis, a completely burnt offering. That's because he comes to see and be seen. The Chagiga is to be eaten by family, to celebrate. When is this brought? You have 7 days on Sukkot, you have 7 days on Pesach. So there are karbonas being brought on Pesach. Anyway, related festive, the karbonas achak, represented by the egg on the Seder plate. That's the karbonas chagiga and the oilers. We're not going to all of that right now. But so anyway, bring your karbonas on Pesach. These people are 1 day shy, so you'll bring it on Pesach. A month later. Why a month later? And the final biggest question really is, the whole story doesn't make it. They come with a tiny complaint. It's not fair. Why should we be left out? Every halach has its rules. Moishe Rabbeinu's response should have been, you're tamei, and for good reason, you had the schus to carry the remains of Yosef. You're not being penalized, not going to be punished in the Olam Haba. These are circumstances beyond your control. This is the halacha. You have to be told. Next year, gesundheit, wherever it's going to be, you'll bring it. I mean, every halacha has its rules. Not we say it's a very good idea. Let's ask the Eibishter, and God says, yes, I was waiting for this. It's all very strange. One answer to all these questions. One answer to why it is the Rambam considers it a separate mitzvah. One answer why Hashem says a month later, and one answer to why they didn't just get a polite "I'm sorry" and that was the end of the story. The answer is that we're all familiar with this, that Pesach Sheni represents the avoid of the Baal Tshuva. Pesach Rishon is the avoid of the tzaddik. What's the avoid of the tzaddik? The tzaddik is the person who stays on the straight and narrow and does what he has to do and doesn't deviate. Here's the strange thing. Ideally, that's what we should be doing. Hashem gives us the rule book and follow the rules and don't deviate. That's the ideal. Okay, friends, so listen to this. It's very, very, you've heard it, but it's dangerous information because we're very clever at manipulation. So not to manipulate. I'm going to give you an example in business. You guys in business understand this better than me. Business, successful business, first and foremost, is based on what? On planning, on seeing all the future possible scenarios and being prepared for it. It's all about a cheshbon. If you want to attract investors to your business, they want to see that you've thought it through on all the possible scenarios, protected their money, and as much as possible, guaranteed a profit. If there's any like a loose hole here, what happens if you're not investing? It's on the one hand. On the other hand, every businessman knows that where the real profits are made, so when it all goes wrong, when the unexpected happens, that could either destroy you, or that's the opportunity for the great wealth. Very often, a lot of people, certainly when it's sudden and radical, their wealth happens, dafka when what? Everything collapses. And they're able somehow to exploit this into profit. And you all know many examples of that. Moreover, the real businessman relishes in that. That's when the juices get going. The profit, he's producing, and they're buying and the selling, that's nice. He knows how much he invested, he knows he's going to get back, and that's the end of the story. When all of a sudden something happens, and that's not on the plan, and on the surface, it's a setback. That's when the genius comes. That's when the real businessman comes, and that's when he's able to turn it around and make it a profit. So it's a bit of a contradiction. On the one hand, business, he himself is all based on order and structure and thinking all the possible scenarios, but there's a deep, almost unspoken part that he relishes when it's not going to be this way. And that's when Now this model is the Eibishter in us. Here's the rule book. Follow it. The emphasis is when we sin. And it all goes kapoir, and then we do tshuva. Oh, that's the real nachas. That's the real nachas. Why is it the real nachas? Because even there you didn't forget me, and you didn't give up on yourself. Even then you believed in yourself and in me. That's what tshuva means. Now that's a real deep connection that nothing can get in the way, not even your sin. Not even this can separate us. That in the tshuva expresses the deepest bond. And moreover, as we talked about, the true Baal Tshuva, he comes back with a great passion and enthusiasm, dafka, because of where he was. And he has an appreciation of Yiddishkeit that the tzaddik who always had it just can't muster. If you always have water available, you drink the water, you come from the desert, it's a whole different experience. The tzaddik has to learn this passion, this appreciation, this humility. I can't believe I have the water. And that's what the Eibishter relishes. So Pesach Sheni is the symbol of tshuva. It's the symbol of tshuva. They were impure. And if you go deeper, they're impure from what? From death. Even though they were tzaddikim, they were carrying Yosef's coffin. But the whole model, every sin is death. What's sin? A simple level. Hashem gave a moment of life to connect, and I used it I killed the moment. I killed the moment of life. Every sin is a death. That's Pesach Sheni, they're coming. And Eivish is saying, Gewalt, I'm waiting for this. I'm waiting for this. What are they saying? We're not taking no for an answer. We're not taking no for an answer. That's the Baal Tshuva says, please, I know the rule book you said, and I didn't, logically, you're given a recipe. You say you make the cake. You don't follow the recipe. It's finished. So I can't help you. You can't. You ruined it. He ruined it. Over. No, says the Baal Tshuva. Eibush, I cannot be. I know you want me, and I have to be connected to you. And Hashem was waiting, because tshuva has to come from the people. The big question is, if Hashem had this in mind, command it to begin with. No, he has to hear that. Has to come from the cry of the Baal Tshuva. It's not in the rule book. It has to come from the Yid, which is even deeper than the rule book. Why is there a rule book? Because he wants a relationship with us. A Yid is higher. And that's where this cry comes from. And that's what Hashem responds to. And the Rambam is saying it's a separate mitzvah, because this is like tzaddik. This is a whole new level. It's not like if you want the tzaddik, so you give you a compensation prize. Regel b'fnei atzma, even though he's stricter, but in the end, regel b'fnei atzma, it's a separate yom tov that tzaddik has to aspire for this kind of relationship, this kind of passion. And that's why it's not on Pesach. Pesach is the tzaddik, it's birth, it's still innocent, it's the second, it's a whole month later. It's a whole new avodah. And that's why it's one day, not 7 days. 7 represents progression, nature, Sunday, Monday, the tzaddik. We know tomorrow exactly where he's going to be based on where he is today. The Baal Tshuva is radical. The 1 day is more, not less. Because where you are today, it's 1 day like Yom Kippur, not because it's beyond the system. And finally, we can understand also why the halach is he can have chametz. Chametz ime babayis, he can own chametz. What happened all of a sudden? Because what is chametz? Chametz represents the ego, sin. The tzaddik has never went there. He's represented by the matzah. But the Baal Tshuva is transforming it. He's bringing his sin. The sin is the fuel for his passion, for his connection, for his demand. That's why he's so crazy, because look what I did. It's like the rotting vegetation. There's now the compass becomes the means to make the lush harvest. So he has the chametz because the Baal Tshuva transformed his past. The tzaddik doesn't go there, but he transforms even that moment. Even there, deep down, I was a Yid and I wanted to be part of you and I just was distracted. And now he unlocks that deep connection. He unlocks that. He's transforming his past. And as we said before, end of the day, that's why it happens. Sin is part of God's plan. Why? Because of the deep connection in Teshuvah that is sure to result. God promises, you have no choice. You're going to do Teshuvah. Only choice is today, tomorrow. That's all. Delay the process, torture everybody and myself, or embrace it right away. That's the only choice in the end we have. Mashiach is coming. The whole question of free choice. What if we'll sin and Mashiach will not come? It's not a braid. It's not going to do this way or that way. Call a chayiv, call a zakah. It's going. The end result is your choice is. My choice is: are we going to postpone this and torture ourselves, or embrace our deepest longings and yearnings and transform our past in the most incredible way. And that's what Pesach Sheni is. Therefore, conclusion, all the questions are answered. It's a separate Yom Tov. It's a higher form of service. It's a month later. It's not part of the Pesach thing. It came only as a result of the demand of the Jews. It's one day because it's radical. It's beyond the system of 7 of time. And even Chometz is with him because it has the power to transform the past. By divine providence, I think all of us are going to be on the, Robert, I'm sure that Rabbi Jacobson will talk about it, but we would try to find the Shabbos to go to the oil. It turns out that this Shabbos was the Shabbos. And thinking about it, could it be a better Shabbos if this is what the main thing the Rebbe did for all of us, for the whole world, is Pesach Sheni. Never give up on the Yid. On the contrary, no matter how far we may have strayed, on the contrary, this will lead to even the greatest tshuva. The power of tshuva, the power of a Yid, and to do so b'simcha. So friends, have a wonderful Shabbos. Thanks all for joining. And we'll see you, Robert, we'll see you on Shabbos and Shul. Good. Okay.
Good Shabbos, good Shabbos.
Ronnie, we'll see you Sunday.
Amen.
In Mitzvah Hashem.
Amen.
Thanks, Rabbi. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.